Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to John Dudley Speaks. I'm your host, Freddie Gibbs. Nobody else in music has an identical sound to that of Barrington Hendrix, aka JPEGMafia. Hailing from Flatbush and subsequently Louisiana, Peggy served in the U.S. Air Force and even did a tour at a very young age in Iraq. While stationed in Japan, he worked on numerous mixtapes up until he was honorably discharged due to citing racism in the ranks of the U.S. military. And that, along with his self-proclaimed tumultuous upbringing, has definitely had a major impact on not only his political worldview, but his abrasive approach to industrial-tinged production that indulges stylings from Death Grips, Clipping, and Injury Reserve. Notable mixtapes that came from him as he changed his name to JPEGMafia included Communist Slow Jams and Dark Skin Manson, which preceded his 2016 debut record Black Ben Carson. Though the album wasn't particularly my favorite, it was evident from the elaborate song structures, forceful vocal deliveries, and experimental production palette that we were about to see something completely unique for the next half-decade plus. 2018's Veteran, one of the best hip-hop albums of the 2010s, has Peggy brilliantly commenting on modern culture with insightfully bleak lyricism that matches his avant-garde compositions. The punk-infused All My Heroes Are Cornballs followed the next year, and while not as potent as its predecessor in my view, I get why some fans view this as his best record to date, with his deeply hilarious dark humor tethering us to his mindset more than ever. 2021's LP contained offline and online versions, and though I prefer the offline version due to its pacing and the samples that were included that couldn't be included on the streaming version, overall it's a magnetic project that's slyly funny and paranoid, giving us Peggy in his rawest form yet, both sonically and thematically. Last year gave us my favorite Peggy project so far, Scaring the Hose with Danny Brown, and this was my number 3 album of 2023 due to the immaculate interplay between Danny and Peggy, as well as the freewheeling energy that it coasts along with, despite it being often caustic and inflammatory. However, as this prolific and quality-driven run continues from Peggy this year with I Lay Down My Life For You, can we expect him to continue this trend of pushing the envelope? I mean, yeah, and honestly, I think he's just getting started. From an aesthetic perspective, this is an absolutely enthralling, stunning, and hypersensitive sonic palette that manages to gel far more cohesively than one would suspect. Before I get into the track by track, just know that the punk rock flavors of the instrumentals are audible throughout this entire thing. It's quite possibly the most that Peggy has ever dabbled in this hybrid of this sound. Not to mention, it truly works. The buzzsaw metal guitars and the tense cymbals and percussion that build up like a Danzig track with even more of a sinister tone on the opener, I Scream This in the Mirror Before I Interact with Anyone, is a fucking dynamite way to start this record. But the energy goes from an 11 to an 18 immediately. Sin Miedo, one of my personal favorite songs of the year, welds together genre fusions that should not work at all, but they're perfectly fused with confidence from Peggy. The club-ready samples, the heavy metal riffs and licks, the noise rock drums, and the surprisingly industrial EDM-driven outro are mixed excellently, layering each idea into the fabric of the composition without giving us a chance to take it in, leading to an exhilarating auxiliary experience. The chopped and pitched up samples of I'll Be Right There and Either On or Off the Drugs add character to each song, and even though these are more straightforward rap cuts, the grandness is apparent with the string arrangements and the horn passages bleeding into the mix. New Black History is trap punk at its finest, implementing an inventive sample of a sample with the hook of Senorita from 2015's Summertime 06, as it ironically coasts alongside a Vince Staples verse. But the ingenuity does not stop there, with vulgar display of power indulging in powers that be style experimental punk, while the true musical centerpiece here, Exmilitary, leverages industrial synths that constantly build suspense until it erupts at the back end of the track. I also love the intensity of Jihad Joe and JPEG Ultra, that feature trashy drums and dingy production stylings, while cross-cutting with the gargantuan maximalism on the synth, strings, and horn side once again. Yet where I think Peggy achieved perfection here is on Don't Put Anything on the Bible, leaning heavily into alternative rock-inflected Baroque pop, a stark outlier in the track listing that directs our attention to every element of it, delivering in my view what is a sweeping exclamation point to the hybridization of many genres that he tests out throughout this album, completely earning the results of the stylistic deviation.
Now let me that my brothers, my keeper was serving that either before I defeat.
Peggy's in-your-face writing may not be for everyone, and even me at times I find myself at odds with the way that he brings about his lyrical and thematic motifs. But aside from scaring the hoes, this is the most that I've ever enjoyed his lyrical presence on a record. Right from the jump, Peggy is dropping hilarious bars comparing his ops to Jake Paul, but it's far more blistering than that, pointing out hypocrisy of the ones that are trying to take advantage of his lucrative position, while also using their platform to speak out against capitalism. Sin Miedo is carnal and defiant in every lyrical sense, not holding back in its I don't give a fuck attitude, but even as he's insulting his critics, he's making strong points about the hip-hop circus right now and who should be hanging up their hats sometime soon. I was a big fan of the writing on I'll Be Right There, which adopts a more confessional and bitter tone, and the Bronny line about nepotism hit pretty hard while sandwiched in between slick wordplay. Obviously, there's Drake lines on here like on It's Dark and Hell is Hot, which I didn't mind. Some might construe this as another Yo Dot, I got you kind of moment, but Peggy's not new to going after Drake, so I thought this fit right in. Except he's not really calling out Drake as much as he is the institution itself. And that's explored expertly in Exmilitary, where Peggy compares his talent to those who have not had to try nearly as hard to get the same level of respect. Then there's Don't Put Anything on the Bible, which features some of Peggy's best thematic work yet, hitting the core themes about religion and depression, with the final line of the song, some depression is deeper than rap, putting literally everything that we just heard into perspective quite painfully. So while I did love a lot of the writing passages here, not all of the arrangements worked for me from a songwriting POV, and of course I think that really does come down to personal tastes. I just feel like the stark shift in dynamics, which isn't new to Peggy at all, just didn't come off as smoothly executed as it did in his previous projects. There were times like on Jihad Joe and Loop It and Leave It, where it came across like Peggy had a great idea at the core of the composition, but just couldn't quite bring it to life in a cohesive way.
I hear you went down, 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 down. I hear you went down.
The intensity coming from behind the boards on this project are met with the exact same level of intensity from Peggy himself, and I treasure how much he took this seriously. JPEG Ultra finds Peggy fully flexing, not only in his talents of being able to glide over a beat, but he also stops himself from overdosing on the usual energy that he gives, allowing Denzel Curry to fittingly dip in with escalation. But conversely, his work on Vulgar Display of Power, Sin Miedo, Exmilitary, and New Black History is epic in its brash demeanor and almost swashbuckling modern-day pirate swagger coming from the center of it. It's weird, but it just never denies Peggy the main character status on this record. Don't Rely on Other Men is another knockout. His triplet flows easily rolling across the buzzing synth-driven instrumental, mixing his declarative tone with a candor that we've grown accustomed to from him. The opener has him diving into his usual satirical style vocal delivery, but there's a dafter edge here that follows him through the entire album up to I Recovered From This, where his vocal timbre is intimidating, sure, but also slightly annoyed and over it, reflecting what I believe to be a constant turmoil that he's facing. General distaste with the industry that consistently writes him off. The only minor issue that I have with this album's track listing is a couple of the arrangements that don't quite work for me, mainly due to their sudden and jarring nature. But overall, it's not a problem that throws off the vibe at all. Otherwise, there's a huge lack of skips throughout the project, and past that, we're met with completely dense musical aesthetics that leave no stone unturned, making the sequencing come off as varied and unexpected. Specifically, the midsection with Vulgar Display of Power and Exmilitary is a huge plus. And though most tracks here are 2 to 3 minutes, the ones like Exmilitary and JPEG Ultra and Don't Put Anything on the Bible, which all exceed 4 minutes, make effective use of the extra time to hit home on the themes even more so than the other tracks. With that, we have an incredibly consistent and rewarding listen that's punishing as hell, with easy replay value that will keep the record enduring.
Anytime you need it, she come through. Turn on the lights. I'm looking for her. I'm looking for her. I'm looking for her.
Look, I ain't really into flashing, I feel like an accident, I'm never.
This is mastery at work right here. Total mastery. It may not be a perfect album, but this latest effort from Peggy is the closest that we've gotten to a straightforward punk rock album in hip hop in a long time. And I have to applaud his continued experimentation with the form. It's unlike anything being produced right now, but because of its existence, it will undoubtedly inspire far more variations of the genre like this one. But hey, that's just my perspective. If you're a Peggy fan, holy shit. And if you're in search of an authoritative punk rap masterpiece that'll melt your ears and your mind, you gotta check this out. Alright, that's all I got. Bye!